The cold wind of early November swept through the streets of New York City. It was mid-morning, and pedestrians hurried past, their faces buried in scarves, hands in pockets, avoiding eye contact with the world around them. Among the bustle, an old man sat hunched over on a worn-out bench, his clothes tattered, his hands trembling as he extended them out, hoping for some change from the passers-by. Hello. Welcome. Enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications. His name was William Turner, but most people didn't know that. To them, he was just another homeless man on the corner of Fifth Avenue, easily ignored. But today was different. Today, William's heart felt particularly heavy, and he couldn't hold back the tears that had been quietly building for weeks. His frail shoulders shook as silent sobs escaped him. He didn't even care if anyone noticed. No one ever did. For weeks now, a young man had crossed his path every morning. Dressed in a tailored suit, hair slicked back, and always holding his coffee, he stood out from the crowd. Unlike everyone else, the young man had started to notice William. First, it was just a glance. Then, an occasional nod. Today, however, the young man stopped. "Sir, are you all right?" The voice was hesitant but filled with concern. William, startled by the question, quickly wiped his eyes, trying to pull himself together. His pride had long been broken, but there was still a shred of dignity he clung to, especially when someone showed him kindness. The young man knelt beside him, his expensive shoes tapping the concrete. "I've seen you here before," he said. "You always seem so lost. What's going on? Can I help?" For a moment William just stared, speechless. It had been years since anyone had asked him that. The man's sincerity caught him off guard, and before he knew it, the words started spilling out. I'm ashamed to even tell you, son." William began, his voice hoarse. "You see, I wasn't always like this. I used to have it all, a business, a family, everything a man could want. But one day, it all slipped away." The young man listened intently, his brow furrowed as William spoke. His name was Ethan Cole, and though he was barely 30, he had already made a fortune. A millionaire by sheer determination and business savvy, Ethan had little time for sentimentality. But something about this old man pulled at him, urging him to stay and listen. "What happened?" Ethan asked softly. William swallowed hard, the memories flooding back. "It was my business partner. He betrayed me, took everything I had. I was too trusting. I lost it all, my savings, my house. My wife, she couldn't take it. She left. And here I am, a shell of the man I once was." For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. His world was so far removed from the hardships William described, yet something about the man's pain resonated with him. He could see the shame in William's eyes, the weight of years of regret. "You know," Ethan said after a long pause, "I wasn't born into wealth. I had to fight for everything I have. But luck was on my side. Sounds like yours ran out. What if I could help you turn things around?" William blinked in disbelief. "Help me? How? I'm too old, too broken." Ethan shook his head. "No one's ever too old to start again. You just need someone to believe in you." William sat in stunned silence, his hands trembling as Ethan's words lingered in the cold air. No one had offered him help in years, at least not like this. People had tossed him spare change, perhaps a sandwich or a cup of coffee, but nothing that could change the course of his life. He didn't know if he could trust this young man, but for the first time in years, something flickered inside him. Hope. Ethan noticed the hesitation in William's eyes. "Look," he said, his tone softer now, "I'm not offering charity. I'm talking about a real chance. You said your partner betrayed you, took everything. You had a business once, right? So you know how to build things. Maybe we can figure something out." William shook his head slowly, the weight of his years evident in the slump of his shoulders. "I don't know, son. I've lost more than just money. I've lost my way, my pride. And what could I possibly offer you?" He turned away, his voice fading with each word, as if the very act of speaking was exhausting. Ethan knelt closer, meeting William's eyes again. "You're wrong. You're still here, still fighting to survive. That's worth something. For a moment, William's mind drifted back to the days before everything had fallen apart. He remembered the mornings spent in his office, sipping coffee as the sun streamed through the window. He had built something back then, a thriving small business that provided for his family and employees. But then, the betrayal. His business partner, Richard, had exploited his trust, siphoning funds until there was nothing left. The memories hit him like a wave. Richard, he was like a brother to me, William said quietly, almost to himself. We built everything together. I trusted him with my life, my family's future. And he took it all. Ethan remained silent, letting William talk. This wasn't the first time he'd heard a story like this. Business gone wrong, partners turning on each other. But hearing it from William, someone who had ended up on the streets because of it, made it feel more personal, more tragic. Did you ever try to go after him? Ethan asked, breaking the silence. William let out a bitter laugh. Go after him? With what? After the business collapsed, I barely had enough to keep a roof over my head. And when the house was gone, well, you know the rest. Lawyers cost money, son. Money I didn't have. Ethan sat back on the bench, his mind racing. He had seen men like Richard before. Cunning, ruthless, willing to destroy others to climb the ladder of success. It disgusted him. But he wasn't naive enough to think that every wrong could be righted. Sometimes justice was out of reach. But maybe William didn't need justice. Maybe he just needed a second chance. Let me ask you this, Ethan began, his voice steady. If you could do it all over again, start a business, build something new, would you? William didn't respond immediately. His fingers fidgeted with the hem of his coat, his eyes downcast. I'm too old, Ethan, he said finally, his voice a whisper. I don't have the strength I used to. The world has changed, and I'm just a relic. Ethan leaned forward, his voice firm. That's not true. Experience is never a relic. And you're not done yet. You said it yourself, you had a business. You built something from the ground up once. You can do it again. For the first time, William looked Ethan in the eye, truly seeing him. This wasn't just a rich man offering pity. There was something genuine in Ethan's voice, a belief that William had long forgotten how to hold on to. Why are you doing this? William asked, his voice thick with emotion. You don't even know me. Ethan shrugged. Maybe I see a bit of myself in you. Or maybe I've seen enough men like Richard win while people like you lose. It's not right. And I'm in a position to help. So why wouldn't I? William took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his past pressing down on him. He wanted to believe in Ethan's offer, but the fear of failing again was almost paralyzing. The streets had taught him not to hope. Hope led to disappointment. But something inside him, something buried deep, told him this was different. I don't even know where to begin, William admitted, his voice small. Ethan smiled. That's where I come in. Let's start small. First, you need a place to stay, right? There's a shelter not too far from here that's actually decent. We'll get you cleaned up, get you settled, and then we'll talk business. William looked at him, trying to gauge if this was real. But the sincerity in Ethan's eyes gave him a reason to believe, even if just a little. You'd really do that? Get me into a shelter? William asked, hope creeping into his voice despite himself. Ethan nodded. That's just the start, William. You're not done yet. Not by a long shot. For the first time in years, William allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in that moment, he realized he wasn't as broken as he thought. Maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild. The sun dipped lower behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the city as Ethan helped William to his feet. The old man winced, his legs stiff from sitting on the cold bench for so long. But with Ethan's steady hand, he managed to stand upright. There's a shelter a few blocks from here, Ethan said, adjusting his coat against the chill. It's clean, safe, and they have resources that might help you get back on your feet. William hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the crowd of strangers passing by. He had been invisible for so long that the idea of people seeing him, caring for him, felt almost foreign. "What if they don't take me in?" he muttered, the doubt clear in his voice. "They will," Ethan reassured him. "I'll make sure of it." The two men walked in silence for a while, the only sound the steady hum of traffic and the soft shuffle of William's worn-out shoes against the pavement. As they neared the shelter, the building came into view, modest, with a small, flickering sign that read, "St. Andrew's Shelter." It wasn't much, but it looked warm, and to William, warmth had become a distant memory. Ethan led William through the front doors, and they were greeted by a woman at the reception desk. She was in her late 50s, with short gray hair and a kind smile. "Good evening," she said, her eyes quickly flicking to William and then back to Ethan. "How can I help you?" Ethan stepped forward. "Hi, my name is Ethan Cole, and this is William Turner. He's been having a rough time, and we were hoping to find him a place to stay for a while." The woman's expression softened as she looked at William, who stood awkwardly by the door, clearly unsure of what to do or say. "Of course," she replied warmly. "We have a few beds available. Mr. Turner, I'll just need a bit of information, and we can get you settled." William blinked, not quite believing how quickly things were moving. I'm not sure what to say," he stammered. "I don't have much left. No ID, nothing." The woman smiled gently. "That's all right. We'll work with what you have. Why don't you come sit down while I fill out the forms?" William nodded, cautiously moving toward the desk, feeling out of place in a world that had long since turned its back on him. Ethan gave him an encouraging nod as he took a seat next to the reception desk. "Thank you," William mumbled as the woman began to ask basic questions. Name, age, any medical conditions. With each answer, William felt a piece of himself returning, as if being recognized by someone, even just on paper, was giving him a sense of identity again. After a few minutes, the paperwork was complete. "All right, Mr. Turner," the woman said, standing up. "We'll get you a room upstairs. It's not much, but it's clean and warm. You'll have your own bed, and there's dinner served in the dining hall in about an hour." William stood, feeling a lump forming in his throat. He hadn't slept in a proper bed in months. I don't know what to say," he muttered again, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan smiled, patting him on the shoulder. "You don't have to say anything. This is the start of something new, William. One step at a time." The woman led William down a hallway and up a narrow staircase to a small, simple room with a single bed, a nightstand, and a window that looked out over the city. The room was far from luxurious, but to William, it felt like a palace. Once the door closed behind them, William stood in the middle of the room, staring at the bed, unsure of how to process the sudden shift in his life. I've been out there for so long," he said softly, not to anyone in particular. "I don't know if I even remember how to be normal." Ethan, who had followed him upstairs, leaned against the doorframe. "Normal is overrated," he said with a small grin. "You just need to figure out what comes next." William turned to face him, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "Next?" he repeated. "I don't know if I have a next, Ethan. I'm too old to start again. You're a young man, you've got time. But me? What could I possibly do?" Ethan shook his head. "Age doesn't matter, William. What matters is that you're still here. You're not finished yet, and I think you know that too. Otherwise, you wouldn't have let me bring you here." William sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I just don't want to hope for something and then have it all crash down again. I can't go through that." Ethan walked further into the room, standing by the window. "It's different this time. You've got someone in your corner now. But we need to take things one step at a time. First, get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk about what you want to do next." William was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe you're right," he said softly. "Maybe I do have one more fight left in me." Ethan smiled. "That's the spirit. I'll come by tomorrow morning, and we'll figure this out together." As Ethan turned to leave, William called out, "Ethan, thank you. I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you." Ethan paused at the door, looking back at William. Like I said, no one should have to go through this alone. Get some sleep, William. Tomorrow's a new day. As the door closed, William sat down on the bed, the mattress creaking slightly beneath him. He ran his hands over the soft blanket, still not quite believing that he was indoors, in a room with a bed. The world outside had been so harsh for so long that this felt like a dream. For the first time in years, William Turner closed his eyes with a sliver of peace in his heart. Tomorrow, as Ethan had promised, was indeed a new day. The morning sunlight filtered through the small window of William's room, casting a soft glow across the bed where he lay. For the first time in months, William had slept through the night without waking to the chill of the streets or the noise of the city. His body, sore and aged, felt slightly lighter as he stirred under the warmth of the blanket. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, trying to shake the strange feeling of waking up in a place that felt safe. As he looked around the simple room, a part of him still couldn't believe he was here, that someone had cared enough to bring him out of the cold. Ethan's words from the night before echoed in his mind. "You're not done yet." A knock on the door snapped him out of his thoughts. "Come in," he said, his voice groggy from sleep. The door opened, and Ethan stepped inside, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Morning, William," he greeted, offering one of the cups. "Thought you might need this to start the day." William took the coffee gratefully, the warmth spreading through his cold hands. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything," he said, taking a sip. The hot liquid seemed to jolt him awake, reminding him of the mornings long ago, back when he still had a business, a home, a life. "How'd you sleep?" Ethan asked, sitting down on the small chair by the window. William leaned back against the headboard, cradling the cup in his hands. "Better than I have in a long time," he admitted. "I didn't realize how much I missed sleeping in a bed until I was in one again." Ethan smiled. "Good. That's the first step. Now, I thought we could talk about the next one." William raised an eyebrow. "Next step? I'm not sure what that even looks like." "Ethan, you said something about starting again, but I don't know if I have the strength for that." Ethan nodded, understanding. "I get it, but we're not talking about jumping straight into something big. We'll take it slow. Let's start by figuring out what you want. You mentioned before that you had a business. Tell me more about that." William stared into his coffee, memories flooding back. Memories he hadn't allowed himself to think about in years. "It was a small manufacturing company," he began, his voice distant. "We made specialty parts for construction equipment. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. I built it from the ground up with my partner, Richard." At the mention of Richard's name, William's expression darkened. "I trusted him with everything. We were supposed to be a team, but he started siphoning money from the company behind my back. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. We were bankrupt." Ethan listened intently, leaning forward. "That must have been hard. Losing everything because of someone you trusted." William nodded slowly, his grip tightening on the coffee cup. "I wasn't just angry, I was ashamed. Ashamed that I hadn't seen it coming. Ashamed that I couldn't protect my family from the fallout. My wife left me when the house went into foreclosure. I don't blame her. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror after that." A heavy silence filled the room as William's words hung in the air. Ethan could see the years of pain etched into the lines of the old man's face. He realized that William wasn't just mourning the loss of his business. He was mourning the loss of his identity. "You said you built the business from the ground up," Ethan said after a moment. "That takes skill, William. What you did back then, you could do it again." William let out a bitter laugh. "You make it sound so easy. But I'm not the man I was, Ethan. That was a long time ago." "I'm not saying it's easy," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "But you have the experience. You know what it takes to build something. That doesn't just disappear." William shook his head. "Even if I wanted to, I wouldn't know where to begin. I don't have the money, the resources, nothing." Ethan set his coffee down on the nightstand and leaned forward. "That's where I come in. I told you this isn't charity. I'm not offering a handout. But I'm willing to invest in you, William. We could start small. You don't need to rebuild the same business, but we can find something that fits your skills. Something that gives you a purpose again. William stared at him, stunned by the offer. You'd really do that? Invest in me? Ethan nodded. I believe in second chances, and I believe you're worth the risk. You know what it's like to lose everything, and that makes you more cautious, more determined not to make the same mistakes. That's something money can't buy. For a moment, William didn't know what to say. The thought of starting over, of reclaiming a piece of his old life, felt impossible. But Ethan's words struck a chord. Maybe he did have something left to offer. Maybe he wasn't as washed up as he thought. I don't know, William said cautiously. What kind of business could I even start? I don't have the connections I used to, and everything's changed. Ethan smiled. That's the beauty of it. We don't need to rush into anything. Let's explore your options. I know people and I have resources. There's no pressure, but we can take this step by step. William fell silent again, his mind spinning. It had been so long since he had even considered the idea of doing something meaningful. But the way Ethan talked, it made the impossible seem possible. All right, William said finally, setting down his coffee. I'm not promising anything, but I'll think about it. I'll see what's out there. Ethan nodded, satisfied with the response. That's all I'm asking. We'll take it one day at a time. As they talked, a quiet determination began to stir in William's chest. He had spent so long believing his life was over, that the streets were all that was left for him. But now, for the first time in years, the path ahead didn't seem so bleak. Before leaving, Ethan stood up, placing a hand on William's shoulder. I'll check in with you tomorrow. We can go over some ideas and see where we can start. William nodded, feeling something unfamiliar swell within him. Hope. Thank you, Ethan. I never thought I'd get a second chance. Ethan smiled. We all deserve one, William, and this is yours. As Ethan left, William sat alone in the small room, staring out the window at the bustling city below. His mind raced with thoughts of what could be. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just thinking about surviving. He was thinking about living. The next morning, Ethan returned to the shelter, greeted by the sound of laughter and conversation as a few residents gathered in the common area. He found William sitting alone at a table near the window, a cup of coffee in hand and a pensive look on his face. Morning, William, Ethan said as he approached. William looked up and smiled faintly. Morning, Ethan. Been thinking about what you said yesterday. Ethan sat down across from him. And? Any ideas? William exhaled deeply, his fingers tapping against the side of the cup. I'm not sure. It's been so long since I've even thought about starting a business again. I don't know where to begin, but there's something about what you said that stuck with me. Ethan leaned in, encouraging him to continue. Back when I had my company, William began, his voice growing steadier, I didn't just run it. I knew every part we made, every machine we used, every person we employed. It wasn't just about making money. It was about making something that lasted, something real. But now... He paused, glancing out the window, his mind working through the flood of memories. Now everything feels different. The world's changed. I don't know if I could compete. Ethan nodded, understanding William's hesitation. The world may have changed, but business principles haven't. It still takes hard work, dedication, and an understanding of people's needs. You built something once, and that knowledge is still inside you. We just need to figure out how to adapt it to today's world. William's brow furrowed, and for the first time, a glimmer of curiosity sparked in his eyes. Adapt, huh? What do you have in mind? Ethan smiled. I've been thinking about that. You mentioned you worked with manufacturing, right? Well, there's a growing demand for specialized craftsmanship. People are willing to pay more for custom-made products, especially if they're unique or high quality. What if we tapped into that? William blinked, clearly intrigued but still cautious. Custom-made products? Like what? Ethan shrugged. Could be anything from small machine parts to tools, even custom designs for construction or home improvement. The key is finding a niche where your skills are needed. It doesn't have to be big, just something you're passionate about and that fills a gap in the market. William stared into his coffee, the idea slowly taking root. He had always taken pride in his craftsmanship. The thought of returning to that, of creating something tangible, began to stir something deep inside him. Something that had been dormant for far too long. "I don't know if I can pull it off," William said quietly. "But I like the sound of it. Something I know. Something I can do." Ethan leaned back in his chair, nodding. "That's the first step. Finding something you believe in. Now, if you're serious about this, we can start small. I know some people who could give you a hand, suppliers, contacts in the industry. But first, we need a plan." William nodded slowly, the weight of the conversation settling in. "All right, I'm willing to try, but how do we even get started? I've got nothing. No tools, no shop, no money." Ethan smiled. "Leave that to me. I'll help you get the tools you need, and we'll rent a small space to start. I've got some capital set aside for investments, and I believe in what you can do. But you'll need to put in the work, and once we start, there's no turning back." William's heart raced. This was real. He could feel the excitement bubbling up, but fear was still there, too, fear of failure, fear of losing everything again. "Ethan, I don't know if I can repay you," William said, his voice tinged with anxiety. "I don't want to let you down." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not worried about that. I'm betting on you, William, not just for the money but because I know you've still got it in you. We all have doubts. Hell, I've failed more times than I can count. But that's part of the journey. You get knocked down and you get back up. You're already ahead because you know what it's like to hit rock bottom. You won't make the same mistakes twice." For a long moment, William didn't speak. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. From the pain of his past to the possibility of a future he never thought he'd have again. Could he really do this? Was it too late to start over? Finally, he looked up at Ethan, his expression a mixture of determination and fear. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do it." Ethan smiled, relief flooding his face. "Good. Now, the first thing we need to do is get you set up with the basics, tools, a workspace, maybe a small loan to get things rolling. I've got a guy I can call who rents out small workshops on the cheap. Let me handle that part." William nodded, still processing the enormity of what was happening. "A workshop," he muttered to himself, the idea feeling both foreign and familiar. "It's been so long since I've had a place to work." "We'll get you there," Ethan said confidently. "One step at a time. But first, you'll need to clean up. We've got to make a good impression if we're going to start pitching this idea to people. You look like a man ready for a new beginning. How about a fresh set of clothes?" William chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You really think I can clean up that well?" Ethan smirked. "Let's just say I've seen worse. Besides, a good suit can do wonders. And if we're going to be talking to potential partners, we need to show them you're serious." It had been years since William had worn anything other than the tattered clothes he now owned. The idea of a suit, of looking respectable again, felt strange. But if this was part of starting over, he was willing to try. "All right," William agreed. "I'll trust you on this." Later that afternoon, Ethan took William to a small shop on the edge of the city, where he bought him a simple but sharp suit. As William stood in front of the mirror, dressed in clean clothes for the first time in years, he barely recognized himself. The man staring back at him wasn't the broken figure he had become. For a moment, he saw the version of himself that had existed before everything fell apart. The businessman, the father, the husband. A lump formed in his throat as he straightened the jacket, feeling like a part of himself had returned. Ethan stood behind him, watching quietly. "How does it feel?" Ethan asked. William took a deep breath, nodding. "It feels like a second chance." The next few days were a whirlwind for William. He felt like he was being pulled back into a world that had long forgotten him. A world where suits, meetings, and decisions mattered. Ethan was true to his word. By the end of the week, they had secured a small workshop in a quiet industrial area, and William's hands once again found themselves holding tools and materials that had once been second nature to him. The workshop was nothing fancy. a single large room with concrete floors and high windows that let in shafts of dusty light. But it had everything William needed to start again. The smell of metal, oil, and wood filled the air as William walked through the space, touching the workbenches, familiarizing himself with the tools that had become strangers to him over the years. Ethan stood by the door, watching as William explored the space. "It's all yours," he said, crossing his arms with a smile. "It's not much, but it's a start." William turned to face him, the weight of it all settling on his shoulders. "I never thought I'd see the inside of a workshop again," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "It's overwhelming. I don't know how to thank you." Ethan waved him off. "Don't worry about that. This is just the beginning. Now, we need to start thinking about what kind of products you want to focus on. We're not going for mass production here, but something custom, something unique. What do you think?" William scratched his chin, the gears in his mind turning. "Back in the day, we used to make custom parts for heavy machinery. But that market's too saturated now. What about smaller, specialized tools? Stuff people can't find anywhere else. Custom designs for specific trades or hobbies." Ethan nodded, intrigued. "That's a great idea. Niche markets like that are where the real value is. If we can find the right customers, you could carve out a real space for yourself." William felt a spark of excitement, the first he'd felt in years. He could picture it. The designs, the craftsmanship, the satisfaction of making something with his hands again. But then the doubts crept back in. "I don't have the network I used to," he said quietly. "I don't know where to find customers anymore. I wouldn't even know where to start." Ethan grinned. "That's where I come in. I've got the connections and I know how to market this. We'll start small, maybe local businesses or people who need custom tools for their work. We can build an online presence too. Target niche communities who are always looking for specialized products. I know a few people who can help us get started." William blinked, surprised at how quickly Ethan could envision a path forward. "You make it sound easy," he said, shaking his head with a small laugh. "It's not easy," Ethan replied, his expression serious. "But it's doable. You've got the skills and I've got the resources. All we need is for you to take the leap." William's hands trembled slightly as he looked around the workshop. The possibility of failure loomed large in his mind, but the chance to rebuild, to create again, was more tempting than he had anticipated. The man he once was, the one who built a business from scratch, still existed somewhere inside him, buried under years of loss and regret. "All right," William said, his voice stronger than before. "Let's do this." Over the next few weeks, William worked tirelessly in the workshop. The rust of years on the streets began to fall away as his hands remembered the craft they once mastered. He started small, designing specialized tools for woodworking and metalwork, things that required precision and care. Ethan helped set up an online shop, and with his connections, they secured a few small contracts with local artisans and craftsmen. Each night, William returned to the shelter exhausted but fulfilled. The residents there noticed the change in him, how he walked a little taller, his eyes less weighed down by sorrow. The shelter's staff, including the woman at the reception desk, offered words of encouragement, proud to see one of their own taking control of his life again. Ethan visited the workshop frequently, always bringing new ideas and connections. "I've got a friend who's a contractor," he said one day, leaning over one of William's workbenches. "He's looking for some custom pieces for a project. If you can design a few unique tools for him, it could lead to more work." William smiled as he wiped the sweat from his brow, holding up a nearly finished piece of metalwork. "I'm on it. I've got a few ideas that might fit the bill." The two of them worked together late into the night, discussing ideas and designs. For William, the hours spent in the workshop brought back a part of himself that he thought had been lost forever. The darkness that had clung to him since losing everything slowly began to lift, replaced by the satisfaction of building something with his own two hands. But as the weeks passed and small successes began to accumulate, William couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something could still go wrong. The ghosts of his past were never far from his mind, and one night, as he locked up the workshop, the weight of it all came crashing down on him. Sitting alone on a workbench, William stared at his hands, once steady, now trembling with fear. "What if I can't do it?" he muttered to himself. "What if I fail again?" He could hear the voice of his former partner, Richard, in his mind, mocking him for being too trusting, too naive. The betrayal had left scars that hadn't healed, and now, as he stood on the edge of rebuilding his life, the fear of being let down again consumed him. Just then, the door creaked open, and Ethan walked in, noticing the look of distress on William's face. "Everything all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. William shook his head, his voice trembling. "What if this is all for nothing, Ethan? What if it all falls apart again? I've been down this road before, and I lost everything." Ethan walked over, sitting next to William on the workbench. "You're not the same man who lost everything, William. You've learned from what happened, and you've got people backing you this time. You're not alone." William's eyes glistened as he stared at the floor. "I don't know if I can go through that kind of pain again. Losing it all. It broke me." Ethan nodded, understanding the depth of William's fear. "I get it. I really do. But every successful person I know has been through failure. It's not about avoiding failure. It's about getting back up when it happens. And you've already done the hardest part, William. You've gotten back up. The fact that you're here in this workshop making something again, that's proof that you're stronger than you think." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet hum of the city outside filling the room. Ethan's words lingered in the air, and slowly, William began to breathe easier. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe the fact that he had survived, had made it this far, meant that he could keep going. "You really believe in me, don't you?" William asked, his voice soft but steady. Ethan smiled. "I do. And more importantly, you need to believe in yourself. You've got this, William." With those words, something shifted inside William. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He had a chance, a real chance, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. "All right," William said, standing up and grabbing his tools. "Let's finish this job. No more doubts." Ethan clapped him on the back. "That's the spirit. Let's get to work." The weeks turned into months, and William's small workshop steadily became a place of productivity and purpose. Word of his custom-made tools spread through local circles, and thanks to Ethan's connections, larger orders began to roll in. Contractors, artisans, and even hobbyists sought out William's precision-crafted pieces. His online store gained traction, and the once-forgotten man was now becoming a recognized name in niche markets. But success wasn't without its challenges. The work was demanding, and the pressure of fulfilling orders on time, managing the finances, and ensuring the quality of each product weighed heavily on William. His days stretched into long hours, often working late into the night. The spark of excitement from those first few weeks slowly gave way to exhaustion. One evening, after an especially grueling day, William sat slumped at his workbench, his hands aching from hours of grinding and polishing. His head throbbed with fatigue, and the ticking clock on the wall reminded him that the deadline for his largest order yet was fast approaching. It was a contract that could take his business to the next level, a high-profile project for a prominent architect who wanted custom tools for an entire construction team. Ethan, who had been his constant support, walked into the workshop, noticing the strain on William's face. "You've been at it for days," he said, concerned. "You need to take a break, William. You can't keep pushing yourself like this." William shook his head, frustration clear in his voice. "I can't stop, Ethan. If I don't finish this order, it's over. Everything we've worked for, all the progress, it'll slip away. I'm barely keeping up as it is." Ethan sighed, pulling up a chair beside him. "You're burning out, William. You've got to take care of yourself. If you crash, the whole business crashes. This order's important, but it's not worth destroying yourself over." William rubbed his temples, his mind racing with worries. "You don't understand. This is my second chance, my last chance. If I fail now, I'll lose everything again. I can't go back to that." Ethan's face softened. "You won't lose everything. You've already proven that you can build something from nothing. But you can't do it alone and you don't have to. We'll get through this together, just like we have so far. William looked at him, his eyes filled with doubt. I don't know if I can keep up. I'm too old for this pace. My body's not what it used to be. Ethan stood and crossed his arms, thinking for a moment. Then maybe it's time to bring someone else in. You don't have to do this all by yourself. I know a few people who could help with production, people who understand quality craftsmanship. We can hire a couple of workers to take some of the load off your shoulders. The idea struck William as both a relief and a blow. He had always prided himself on doing the work himself, on being the one who shaped every piece with his own hands. But the reality was staring him in the face. He couldn't maintain this pace forever. If he wanted to grow, he had to adapt. I don't know, William said hesitantly. What if they don't meet the standards? What if they mess something up? Ethan smiled. That's where you come in. You'll be their mentor. You'll train them, make sure they understand the craft the way you do. You'll still be in charge, but you won't have to kill yourself trying to meet every deadline alone. William let out a long breath. The thought of relinquishing control was daunting, but the alternative, burning out and watching everything he had built crumble, was worse. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe it was time to let someone else help. All right, William finally said, nodding slowly. Let's try it. But I need to oversee everything. I can't let the quality slip. Ethan clapped him on the back. Of course, you'll be in control, but we'll find the right people to support you. A few days later, Ethan introduced William to two skilled workers, Greg, a young man with a background in metalworking, and Tom, a seasoned carpenter who had experience crafting tools for niche markets. Both men had heard about William's work through Ethan's network and were eager to learn from someone with his level of expertise. At first, William was skeptical. He watched them closely, his eyes sharp for any mistakes, any signs that they weren't up to the task. But as the days went by, he saw their dedication, their willingness to learn, and most importantly, their respect for the craft. Slowly, William began to trust them, showing them the finer details of his designs, teaching them the precision required for each tool. The pressure eased, and for the first time in weeks, William felt like he could breathe again. The workload was shared, and the quality remained high. The project for the architect was completed on time, and the client was more than satisfied, praising William's work and promising future orders. It was a victory, but it came with a bittersweet realization. William couldn't do it all alone anymore. His body, once strong and capable, had limits. But with Greg and Tom by his side, the business didn't just survive. It thrived. And in the quiet moments, when he wasn't overseeing the work, William found himself feeling something he hadn't expected: pride. Not just in the work they were doing, but in the fact that he had built something bigger than himself, something that could continue even when he no longer could. One evening, as William sat in the now bustling workshop, watching Greg and Tom carefully finishing a new batch of custom tools, Ethan walked in with a satisfied look on his face. I've got some good news, Ethan said, holding up his phone. I've been in talks with a distributor. They want to take on your products for a regional deal. This could be huge, William. William's eyes widened, a mixture of disbelief and excitement washing over him. A distributor? You mean they want to sell my tools in stores? Ethan nodded. That's right. It'll give you a wider reach, more customers, more exposure. We'll have to scale up production a bit, but with the team you've built here, I think we can handle it. William felt a surge of pride and fear all at once. This was everything he had dreamed of, his work in the hands of people all over the region. But with that came new pressures, new risks. Could he keep up? Could the business handle the growth? Ethan seemed to sense his hesitation. We don't have to say yes right away. Take some time to think about it. But know this, William, you've already proven that you can do this. You're not alone, and we're only going up from here. As Ethan spoke, William's gaze drifted around the workshop. The quiet hum of the machines, the focused attention of Greg and Tom, the smell of metal and wood. It all felt like a dream, one he never thought he'd have again. He wasn't the man he had been before. He was older, slower, and the world had changed. But somehow, despite everything, He had found his way back to the life he thought he had lost. And now, with the support of Ethan, his workers, and the growing demand for his craft, William began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could do this. "I'll think about it," William said finally, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "But I've got to say, it feels good to be back." Ethan grinned. "It's not just about being back, William. You're building something new, and it's only just beginning." A month later, William stood outside his workshop, looking up at the small sign that now hung proudly above the door. Turner's Custom Tools. The name had been Ethan's idea, but the moment it went up, William felt a rush of pride that he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a business. It was a testament to the second chance he never thought he'd get. Inside, the workshop was buzzing with activity. Greg and Tom were busy filling new orders, each one more complex than the last. And the business had grown beyond what William had ever imagined. The deal with the distributor had gone through, and now his tools were being sold across several regions. Contractors, artisans, and craftsmen were seeking him out specifically for his custom designs. But despite the success, William never forgot where he had come from. The shelter had been his home for months, and though he now had enough income to afford a small apartment nearby, he still visited regularly, offering his time and resources to help others who were struggling, just as he once had. One evening, as he returned from a visit to St. Andrew's shelter, William found Ethan waiting for him outside the workshop, leaning against the hood of his car. "You're becoming quite the philanthropist," Ethan teased, a grin on his face as William approached. William chuckled, shaking his head. "Just trying to give back. They helped me when I needed it the most. Feels right to do the same for them." Ethan nodded, understanding. "You've come a long way, William. This place, it's more than just a business. It's a new start, a new legacy." William smiled, the weight of those words settling in. "I never thought I'd be here, Ethan. When I was on the streets, I thought it was over. I thought there was no way back. But you believed in me. You gave me a chance when no one else would." Ethan shrugged modestly. "I just saw what was already there. You did the hard part. You rebuilt yourself." William looked around the workshop, the hum of the machines and the laughter of his workers filling the air. This wasn't just a return to the life he had lost. It was something new, something better. He had not only rebuilt his career but also created a sense of community. The people who worked for him weren't just employees, they were family. "You know," William said thoughtfully, "for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm just surviving. I feel like I'm living again." Ethan smiled. "That's the goal, isn't it? We all get knocked down, but the ones who stand back up, they're the ones who make it." "You've made it, William." As they talked, the door to the workshop opened, and Greg stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. "William, we're just about done with that new batch. You want to take a look?" William nodded, glancing at Ethan. "You want to come see?" Ethan grinned. "Absolutely." Inside, Greg and Tom were putting the finishing touches on a set of custom-designed tools, polished to perfection. William examined each one closely, his experienced eyes scanning for any imperfections, but there were none. The craftsmanship was flawless, a reflection of everything he had taught them. "These are incredible," William said, turning one of the tools in his hands. "You guys did a great job." Greg smiled proudly. "We learned from the best." Tom, usually the quieter of the two, nodded in agreement. "You've taught us a lot, William. We're lucky to have you as a mentor." The words hit William harder than he expected. He had spent so many years feeling like a failure, believing that his life was over after Richard's betrayal. But now, standing in the middle of a bustling workshop he had rebuilt from the ground up, surrounded by people who looked up to him, he realized that his life had meaning again. He had not only rebuilt a business, he had rebuilt himself. As the evening wore on, Ethan and William stood outside the workshop once more, watching as the city lights flickered on in the distance. "What's next for you?" Ethan asked, hands in his pockets. "You've already done more than most people ever do." William smiled, his gaze distant but content. "I don't know, Ethan. I'm just grateful to have gotten this far. Maybe I'll expand the business, maybe I'll mentor more young guys like Greg and Tom. But whatever comes next, I know I'm not doing it alone. Ethan nodded. You've built something bigger than a business here, William. You've built a legacy. And that's something no one can take away from you. For a long moment, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the world go by. William felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The ghosts of his past were still there, but they no longer haunted him. He had faced them, overcome them, and emerged stronger on the other side. Finally, William spoke, his voice soft but steady. Thank you, Ethan. I wouldn't be here without you. Ethan smiled, clapping a hand on William's shoulder. You would have found your way, William. I just helped you see it. As they walked back toward their cars, the future no longer seemed like something to fear. It was something to look forward to, a future filled with possibilities, with new challenges and new triumphs. William Turner had found his way back, and this time he wasn't letting go.